Hello and welcome to the Institute of Molecular Cell and Systems Biology's first podcast interviewing some of our PhD students. Today, Emily Armstrong, that's Emily X Armstrong on Twitter, spoke to Ross Eaglesfield, an LCAS PhD student in the Antman Lab, and Jaynee Hart, another PhD student in her third year in John Christie's laboratory.
So my name's Ross. I actually studied for a master's degree here at Glasgow and was fortunate enough during that time to find a PhD here as well. So I'm currently on the Lord Kelvin Adam Smith Scholarship, and that's a multidisciplinary scholarship. So half of my work is done here in biology and half of my work is done with the engineering department, the biomedical engineers to be precise. So I work on basically a bottom-up synthetic biology project where I'm trying to use light to power basically a minimal cell mimic. So I'm building cell mimicking chassis out of phospholipids and trying to insert transmembrane proteins, specifically a rhodopsin protein, into the membrane in order to generate an electrochemical potential, which we could then hopefully use to power secondary active transport events.
What kind of applications would this have?
So one of the major things people talk about when they're doing this kind of research is the origin of life research. So if you can build something up from scratch, it gives you a much better understanding of how it could have come into being in the first place, right? So currently cells are really complicated, okay? Even the simplest bacteria are ridiculously complicated and we don't understand even half of what's going on there. So if we can get to a stage where we can build a cell out of small components, proteins, things like that, it might give us a much better understanding of what's required for life, basically. There's also other biotechnological applications. You could look into sensing applications. There's also a lot of interest in using them as little factories to produce pharmaceutical products, and even using them as drug delivery platforms as well. So for triggered release and targeted release of drugs. Some of those things are actually quite advanced already.
So you had a pretty unconventional introduction to biology, considering your undergraduate degree wasn't necessarily so much to do with biological engineering at all.
Yeah, so my undergrad was done in Stirling, and I did sport and exercise science, which, yeah, on the face of it isn't particularly related, but there was a lot of basic molecular cellular biology involved in the course. And when I first got into it, I didn't have any intention of doing a PhD or really studying biology. I was more interested in the sporting aspects of it, but the further I got in the degree, the more I realized that I actually enjoyed more the biological side of things.
And that catalyzed you going into your master's degree?
Exactly, yeah. So I knew from then on I wanted to do a PhD, but I also knew I didn't have quite enough basic biology experience, so that's why I did a top master's program so I could learn some more biology before I went on to the PhD.
Fantastic. So what would you say about your PhD experience so far at Glasgow?
Yeah, I'd say it's been pretty positive so far. Glasgow's a really nice campus to work in. The buildings are really nice, so I enjoy coming in to work every day. Obviously, the supervision I've had's been great so far from both, because I have two supervisors split over two departments, which are also split over the distance of the campus. So I have to constantly wandering back and forth between two buildings and trying to keep two groups happy. But it's been challenging, but they've been pretty supportive so far. So it's been a good experience.
Would you say that you found it especially stressful so far?
Not particularly. I mean, I've done a lot of other stressful things in my life, so I don't find it particularly stressful. No, not really.
I think that's quite rare for a PhD student to say.
Yeah, I mean, because I took some time out. I've done other things in life as well, so I think I'm a bit better equipped than some PhD students to deal with the stress. Some who have just gone straight from school to undergrad to PhD. I think they probably struggle a little bit more than I do with stress.
So when you're not doing your PhD or here studying, what do you do in your spare time? How do you like to relax?
So I enjoy playing sports.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I did sports science, so I am quite a sporty person. Play American football for the university team, which is great. I played that in Stirling for a few years as well, and then I was quite excited by being able to play here as well. So that takes up, during the semester times, that takes up a lot of my spare time. And apart from that, I enjoy watching movies, reading books, all the usual sort of things that people enjoy, I guess.
So this is a big question, but where do you see yourself going after your PhD? Would you like to stay in academia? Do you think that there's lots of interesting places to look in industrial purposes? Would you like to go into teaching? Sort of where do you think this will actually take you?
Yeah, so I really enjoy the sort of blue sky research, and not necessarily with a guaranteed commercial application. I think research has become a little too focused on that personally. Obviously, I understand why, but I still want to stay in academia. So my goal is to obviously to finish my PhD and then hopefully get a postdoc, and just continue that until I could then potentially get a lectureship post or a fellowship or something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you said you think that maybe research is currently focusing a bit too much on commercial aspects. Do you think this is a completely unavoidable path that research in academia has to take, or do you think that there should be a bit more of a lane between research, horizontal knowledge exchange, not-for-profit, versus the commercialization of that research?
I mean, I don't think it's necessarily the commercialization. I said that, but thinking about it, it's not just that. It's more the constant need to have a really powerful, impactful outcome to the research, right? Whereas I personally think most great science has come from people just trying things out that they thought were interesting, and then that's furthered our understanding of different fields. And I think when you're constantly striving for an application at the end of it, I don't think that leads to a particularly good atmosphere.
No.
But obviously that's the way funding is dealt out.
Yeah.
You have to have that sort of...
You need the end product for them to sort of invest in, because I suppose that's how the funding structure we work under now is that they see, at least for a PhD student, they see you as an investment. They will invest this money in you to get your PhD, to produce research revenue for the university. And I suppose that's exactly the same when you present a project. They just don't want the blue sky product. They want something that they can sell, that they can rely on.
For sure, yeah. But that's what I'm enjoying most about the PhD at the moment, is it's not under any pressure like that, and I'm free to sort of try my own ideas, try my own things without funders or whatever coming in and saying, oh no, you can't do that.
Absolutely.
Or, you know.
And I think we're both quite lucky because we're actually funded by the university under two separate programs. So this way we are kind of free from BBSRC, West Bio, East Bio, the Medical Research Council, who really expect to see a high level of engagement with their final goals.
Yeah, I mean, for my scholarship, all I have to do is present a internal symposium every year, present my research, and that's just with everybody else on the same scholarship as me.
Yeah.
So there's only about 30 people in the whole university or something.
So do you find it quite interesting to see, because obviously the LCAS takes two different institutes, two different schools, two different schools of thinking in a way, and tries to blend them together into one PhD project. Is there lots of very other interesting ones you've seen at the LCAS symposium?
It's a very odd mix, I would say, because it's not just biology and engineering, it's every school and every college and the university can apply for these. So you have collaborations with arts faculties and science and engineering and arts and things. So it's quite interesting, some of the research that's going on. Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thanks. That's it from Ross Eaglesfield, and up next is Jaynee Hart.
So I'm Jaynee Hart. I am a third-year PhD student here at the University of Glasgow, working on a PhD in molecular cell and systems biology. I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Florida. So it was a 4-year Bachelor's of Science that was in botany, actually, with a focus on plant molecular biology. When I was in Florida, I was working on photobiology in strawberries and trying to compare light responses in Arabidopsis to strawberry and see if they're different, because obviously strawberry and Arabidopsis grow in quite different environments. So you're trying to see if there's any difference in the responses. So I decided to continue on in photobiology, and I decided to look for a lab that worked on Arabidopsis because I actually liked the flexibility of having like a fully sequenced genome that you could trust. And so I did that, and now I am working with Professor John Christie on phototropin blue light photoreceptors in Arabidopsis.
So what got you interested in plants in the first place? Because obviously to decide to take an undergraduate bachelor's degree in botany when you're maybe 19, 18 years old, so what drove you to do that in the first place?
As an undergraduate, in fact, I had really diverse interests. So I was a Russian major for 2 years during my undergraduate. In the US, it's a lot more flexible in terms of what you can study. So I was taking Russian studies classes and like Italian studies classes, and but keeping going with the science classes kind of on the side, and I really couldn't decide what I wanted to do, but I knew that in terms of like more sciencey things that it was going to be plants. The university that I went to is a land-grant university, which means in the United States that it has a specific grant of land from the government that is specifically for studying agriculture. So I took a lot of ag classes, like how many pounds of nitrogen do you apply to a field of alfalfa thing, and I really, really enjoyed it. And then, push came to shove, and I decided to continue on with the botany and drop some of the more, like, linguistics and other interests that I had. No regrets, so.
Yeah, but do you find that sometimes your, like, diverse bachelor's degree background, having studied linguistics, you've been able to apply that to your PhD studies in a way?
I think at the end of the day, like, learning how to think and learning how to solve problems is an important thing, not only for life skills, but for any sort of postgraduate work. And I think that those classes were enormously instructive. And, it is a bit of a myth that, like, scientists are automatons who, only think about, hypothesis-driven research. I think even an understanding of things like philosophy are really important for, examining questions and trying to think about our hypotheses. Yeah.
Exactly, I think that's really important as well. I took one of the philosophy of science courses, and it was actually really enjoyable because I always had a sort of backwater interest in philosophy growing up, but it wasn't offered at school, and I just kind of fell by the wayside. And it was so interesting to see and sort of learn to see your own questions from a completely different perspective and really break them down into what the questions actually are rather than what you're trying to achieve at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of a shame, actually, that we don't have more of a focus on kind of the philosophy of science or just how to think generally, because part of our training is supposed to be to learn how to think rigorously about problems, but we often just think about our project specifically rather than more generally. And I think, the broader background that I have, I think, helps in that regard.
Absolutely. I mean, I took English literature at A-level because obviously I went and did my undergrad and I just took straight genetics because you take genetics, you don't you can just take one thing. And I found having this sort of being able to look through long texts and pull out the important bits and think critically about them, you can really apply that to scientific literature as well, because I think that's one of the hardest things going from textbook learning to first order paper learning is it's a minefield. You need to know how to navigate these papers, and I feel like it might be quite difficult for someone who's only ever done science to really navigate them in a way to make it work for them.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. I work with the blue light photoreceptor, phototropin, and what a lot of people don't realize is that light perception in plants is not, strictly speaking, solely for photosynthesis. Light is an important signal that actually has a huge impact on the way in which plants grow. And so phototropin controls a lot of movements towards light, And that has kind of a downstream effect on photosynthesis, because if plants can absorb light more efficiently because of their positioning or orientation, then you can actually improve photosynthesis in that way. And so my research has been focused on what factors affect the sensitivity of this blue light photoreceptor in order to make those positioning responses more effective. Yeah.
Incredible. And what kind of applications do you see your research having? Is it more of a basic understanding question, we want to understand this more, or do you feel like it could be rolled out for further and wider applications in the future?
That's a really complicated question to answer. Especially when I started my PhD, I really did believe that my research could have a large impact on like agriculture generally, if it worked. I understood even then that it might not work, but now I have a more nuanced opinion. There's a lot about the signaling of this protein that we don't understand, and obviously those factors will impact its sensitivity. And so you kind of have to walk before you can run, so you have to understand that. So a lot of my research has been focused on like a basic understanding of how the photoreceptor works. But that said, assuming that everything works, eventually you could see an impact. In fact, I have a mutant that has an increased sensitivity, and I have some preliminary evidence that it has more biomass accumulation than the wild type. So, you get glimmers now and then. It's like, maybe this is going to be something, but I no longer delude myself thinking that...
I think most people go into their PhDs thinking, I'm going to change the world. My research is going to revolutionize this. I'm going to open a new paradigm in biology.
Yeah.
And it's really, I feel like you almost have to go into your PhD feeling that way, because otherwise you just never start.
This is true. Yes. You have to have that kind of little boost of naivete to get you through.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to be, when you realize, after the first 6 months, you're like, oh, well, maybe I'll just characterize something. Yeah. Maybe I'll just try and find a transcriptional network that underpins a specific response that I'm interested in. Then you start to actually knuckle down and find out. And it's just as important understanding the specific small part of an organism than it is applying it to something else, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. And science is a big job. We're never going to run out of questions.
No.
There's always going to be something that we don't know, because as we uncover more things, we're going to have more questions. And so, even though we're kind of workaday PhD students, we're still contributing to a larger understanding of important concepts.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because as a PhD student, sometimes you can feel like you're at the bottom of the pile. Mm-hmm. You look up at everyone, there's postdocs, there's fellows, there's readers, and then there's your PIs, your professors, and you're like, well, that's a long way to get up to the top of that. But they were all there once as well.
Yeah,
they were all doing the same things. Admittedly, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, the fundamental questions were still there to be answered, and right now we're sort of working off the back of those fundamentals. So it might seem like the big discoveries have already been made, but they haven't.
No.
There's still always more things. So moving on from our science discussion, what do you do for fun? How do you like to relax?
My primary relaxation hobby is knitting.
Knitting.
Fact, yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time doing that. I've actually kind of increased my commitment to knitting recently. I've started actually designing my own jumpers.
Amazing.
And I have kind of actually a lab notebook for knitting. And I realized this morning actually how important it was to me, because I lost it and I was like, so much work!
Yeah, I don't know what I'd do if I lost my lab book, let alone a knitting book.
Yeah, well, because I'm making the patterns up myself, so it's good to kind of keep track. I'm getting this many stitches to the inch, which means I need this many rows, But yeah, it's a great way to kind of relax and unwind, and kind of you make something, and it gives me a sense of accomplishment in some ways that I don't get at work. Because sometimes you work all day and you're like, I've done almost nothing.
Yeah. I've done one PCR and it didn't work, but I've got a scarf.
Yeah.
That's what counts.
Yep. Or I spent all day training a master's student and I've done nothing for myself.
Yeah. You don't start your own work until 5 p.m. and you're already starting to fall asleep.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah. So I think it's so important to have meaningful hobbies to find, like you say.
Yep, absolutely.
A massive thanks to both Ross and Jaynee for their interesting and insightful conversations. Check back next time for more of our podcasts. Thanks very much.